The afternoon sky over Brooklyn hung heavy and gray, pressing down on the city like a weighted blanket. November had arrived with its usual indifference, stripping the trees bare and sending icy winds through the streets that made people duck their heads and quicken their pace. On the corner of Prospect Avenue and 9th Street, Rosie's Diner glowed with warm amber light, its neon sign flickering intermittently, a beacon of comfort food and cheap coffee that had served the neighborhood for 40 years. Inside, the diner hummed with the ordinary chaos of a Thursday afternoon. The smell of grilled onions, brewing coffee, and apple pie filled the air. Vinyl booths lined the windows, their red surfaces cracked from decades of use. A jukebox in the corner played Sinatra, barely audible over the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation. Working-class families, elderly couples, and solo diners filled most of the tables, people who came here not for the food, but for the familiarity. Behind the counter, Elisa Martinez moved with practiced efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her uniform, a pale blue dress with roses embroidered on the pocket, faded from countless washings. At 26, she had the kind of face that inspired trust, warm brown eyes, a ready smile, and an openness that made strangers want to tell her their problems. She'd been working at Rosie's for 3 years, picking up double shifts whenever possible, sending money home to her mother in the Bronx, saving whatever scraps remained for a nursing degree she'd been pursuing at a glacial pace. "Order up, Lisa," Jimmy called from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates across the pass-through. "Got it." She grabbed the plates, meatloaf special and a Reuben, and delivered them to table 6 with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was tired, bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from working 6 days a week, from caring for her autistic younger brother on her one day off, from dreams perpetually deferred. The bell above the door chimed. Elisa glanced up reflexively, and something in the air shifted. The man who entered wasn't exceptionally tall, maybe 6 feet, but he carried himself with the kind of presence that made the space around him contract. Marco Bellini was 39 years old and looked like he'd been carved from marble by an artist who specialized in depicting quiet menace. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, probably worth more than Elisa made in 3 months. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, slicked back in a style that suggested old-world elegance, but it was his eyes that arrested attention, dark, deeply set, carrying the weight of things he'd seen and things he'd done. Behind him, 2 little girls shuffled in, and Elisa's attention immediately shifted to them. Twins, 8 years old maybe, beautiful in an almost ethereal way, with their father's dark coloring and delicate features framed by long, straight hair. One wore hers loose, the other in 2 tight braids. They were dressed identically in navy blue dresses, white tights, and patent leather shoes that clicked on the tile floor. But something was off. Their movements were stiff, mechanical. The one with loose hair was humming, a single note, repeated endlessly. The one with braids was flapping her hands rapidly at her sides, her eyes fixed on the fluorescent lights above. Marco's jaw was tight as he guided them toward a booth in the back corner, his hand hovering near them but not quite touching. The diner's ambient noise seemed to swell, a burst of laughter from a nearby table, the crash of dishes in the kitchen, the jukebox switching to a louder song. The girl with loose hair, Sophia, though Elisa wouldn't learn her name until later, stopped walking, just stopped in the middle of the diner and began to rock back and forth, her humming growing louder. "Sophia, come on, baby. Just a little further." Marco's voice was low, tense, edged with a desperation that didn't match his commanding exterior. "Come on, sweetheart." People were starting to stare. The other twin, Gabriella, suddenly let out a high-pitched squeal and covered her ears, her hand flapping becoming more violent. She spun in a circle once, twice, then collapsed to her knees on the floor. "Gabriella." Marco moved quickly, crouching beside her, but when he tried to touch her shoulder, she jerked away violently, her small body rigid. The diner had gone quiet except for the jukebox and the twins. Every eye was on them. Elisa could see the expressions, some sympathetic, most uncomfortable, a few openly judgmental. An elderly woman at the counter whispered something to her companion, shaking her head. A businessman in a booth pulled out his phone. Whether to call someone or record, Elisa couldn't tell. Marco's face had gone dark red, a combination of embarrassment and barely controlled fury, not at his daughters but at his own helplessness, at the situation, at the world. He was a man accustomed to control, to having problems solved with a phone call or a harsh word or, Elisa suspected, worse methods. But these two small girls had reduced him to nothing more than a desperate father failing in public. "Sophia, Gabriella, please." His voice cracked slightly. "Please, just come sit down." Sophia's humming had become a wail. Gabriella was now lying on the floor, her entire body as stiff as a board, her eyes squeezed shut. Tears streamed down both their faces. Jimmy emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his expression uncertain. Rosie herself, the 70-year-old owner who rarely intervened in customer situations, was watching from her usual spot at the register, her weathered face creased with concern. Elisa didn't think. She just moved. She'd seen this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. Her brother, Miguel, was 12 now, and she'd spent countless hours learning his triggers, his needs, the invisible language of autism that most people never bothered to understand. These girls were in sensory overload. The lights too bright, the sounds too loud, the textures and smells and expectations too much all at once. She grabbed her own jacket from behind the counter and approached slowly, keeping her footsteps light. Marco's head snapped up as she neared, his eyes sharp and warning. This was a man who didn't accept help, who saw offers of assistance as threats or condescension. "Please," Elisa said softly, stopping a few feet away. "I think I can help." "We're fine," Marco said automatically, though everything about the situation screamed the opposite. "They're overwhelmed," Elisa continued, her voice gentle but confident. "It's the sensory input. Too much at once." She gestured around the diner, the lights, the noise, the people. "It's not about discipline or tantrums. Their nervous systems are just overloaded." Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe just the desperate willingness to try anything. "What do you suggest?" His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it she heard the plea. "Let me try something. No pressure, no forcing. Just trust me for a minute." Marco's jaw worked. Trust was clearly not something he gave easily. But after a moment he gave a single sharp nod and stepped back slightly. Elisa crouched down several feet away from Gabriella, making herself small and non-threatening. She didn't speak, didn't try to touch the girl. She simply began to hum, the same note Sophia had been humming earlier. After a few seconds, she added a gentle rhythm, tapping her fingers lightly on her own knee. Sophia's wailing began to quiet, her attention caught by the familiar sound coming from this stranger. Elisa pulled off her own cardigan, revealing a soft cotton t-shirt underneath, and draped the cardigan over Gabriella's rigid body like a blanket, creating a gentle pressure. Then she stood slowly and moved to where Sophia stood frozen, still rocking but watching now. "I'm going to turn down some lights," Elisa said, speaking to Marco but keeping her voice calm and even. "Can you ask the owner to dim them, if possible?" Marco didn't question. He strode to the counter and whatever he said to Rosie, quietly with that commanding presence, made her immediately start switching off every other overhead light. The diner dimmed to a more comfortable glow. Jimmy, understanding without being told, turned down the jukebox. The change was almost immediate. Sophia's rocking slowed. Gabriella's body began to relax under the weight of the cardigan. Elisa returned with 2 paper placemats and a handful of crayons from the children's menu basket. "May I?" she asked Marco, gesturing toward the booth. He nodded, and she laid the placemats on the table, arranging the crayons in a neat line. Order, predictability, visual calm. Then she did something that made Marco's breath catch. She knelt beside Gabriella again and began to apply firm, even pressure to the girl's shoulders through the cardigan, the kind of deep pressure that could reorganize an overwhelmed nervous system. She counted silently, maintaining the pressure for 10 seconds, then released, then repeated. Gabriella's eyes opened. She looked at Elisa, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Or just the recognition that here was someone who didn't need her to be different. "The booth," Elisa said softly to Gabriella, pointing. "There's paper to draw on, and it's quieter in the corner." Gabriella sat up slowly, her movements still mechanical but purposeful now. She stood, picked up the cardigan and wrapped it around her own shoulders and walked to the booth. Sophia followed, her steps steadying, her humming finally fading to silence. Marco stood frozen, watching his daughters slide into the booth and immediately reach for the crayons, beginning to draw with intense focus. Repetitive patterns, circles, and lines, nothing representational but clearly meaningful to them. Elisa straightened, suddenly aware that the entire diner was staring at her now instead of the girls. She felt her face flush. I'll get you some menus," she said awkwardly, stepping back. Marco's hand shot out, catching her wrist, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her. His touch was warm, and when she looked up at him she saw something in his face she hadn't expected. His eyes were wet. "How did you—" He couldn't seem to finish the question. "My little brother," Elisa said simply. "He's autistic, nonverbal. I've learned a few things." Marco released her wrist but didn't step back. "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep inside him, somewhere he rarely let anyone see. I don't know what to do anymore. Nobody knows what to do." Elisa's heart clenched. She'd seen this look on her mother's face 1,000 times. The exhaustion, the guilt, the overwhelming sense of failure that came from loving someone you couldn't quite reach. "You were doing fine," she said gently. "This stuff is hard. It's not about doing something wrong, they're just wired differently. Their mother—" Marco started, then stopped, his jaw tightening. "Their mother knew how to handle them. I don't. I never have." The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded, and Elisa realized that this man, whoever he really was, whatever he did that required such expensive suits and commanded such immediate obedience, was just a father who missed his wife and didn't know how to help his children. "You're here," Elisa said. "That's what matters, you're trying." Marco's expression shifted, some of the vulnerability retreating behind the mask of control. He glanced around the diner, seeming to remember suddenly that they had an audience. The customers had mostly returned to their meals, though occasional glances still came their way. "I'll get those menus," Elisa said again, giving him an out, a return to normalcy. This time he let her go. Over the next hour, Elisa checked on their table regularly, maintaining the calm environment she'd created. She brought chocolate milkshakes without being asked. Something about the twins made her think they'd like them, and was rewarded when both girls drank eagerly, their bodies finally relaxed. She kept the area around their booth as quiet as possible, running interference with other customers, asking Jimmy to be gentle with the kitchen noise. Marco ordered food but barely touched it, watching his daughters with an expression of wonder as they drew peacefully, occasionally stimming with small hand movements but no longer in distress. As the dinner rush approached and the light outside faded to full darkness, Marco finally stood to leave. He pulled out his wallet, expensive leather, thick with cash, and laid $500 bills on the table. Elisa's eyes widened. "Sir, the meal was only $40. For your time," Marco interrupted, "for your knowledge, for giving me an hour of peace with my daughters." "I can't accept that," Elisa said firmly. "I didn't do it for money. They needed someone who understood, that's all." Marco stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Everyone wants something." "Not everyone," Elisa replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Some of us just want to help." For a long moment they stood there, separated by the table, by their vastly different worlds, by everything that made this interaction impossible and yet real. Then Marco carefully picked up 4 of the $100 bills, leaving 1 on the table. "For the meal then, and the milkshakes." Before Elisa could protest again, he turned to his daughters. "Sophia, Gabriella, time to go." The girls looked up and Elisa saw the beginning of distress creep back into their features at the change in routine. Without thinking, she crouched beside the booth. "You can take the drawings with you," she said softly. "And the crayons. For the car." Gabriella carefully folded her placemat. Sophia did the same. They each selected 3 crayons and stood, following their father toward the door with their precious papers clutched in small hands. At the door, Marco turned back. His eyes found Elisa across the diner and something passed between them. Gratitude, yes, but also something more complicated. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that their worlds had touched in a way neither had expected. "Thank you," he said again, and then they were gone, disappearing into the cold Brooklyn night. Elisa stood in the middle of Rosie's diner, her cardigan still draped over the booth where Gabriella had left it, feeling like the air itself had shifted. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he'd come from or where he was going, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that this wouldn't be the last time she'd see Marco Bellini and his daughters. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm around her, but Elisa remained still, staring at the door, feeling the ghost of his touch on her wrist and wondering why her heart was beating so fast. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the first of the season, covering Brooklyn in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. at least for a little while. 3 days passed before Marco Bellini returned to Rosie's diner. 3 days during which Elisa told herself she wouldn't think about the mysterious man with the expensive suit and the heartbreaking desperation in his eyes. 3 days during which she failed spectacularly at that resolution, finding her thoughts drifting during the morning rush, during the lunch crowd, during the quiet lull between 2 and 4, when the diner held only coffee sippers and newspaper readers. She'd asked Jimmy about him, casually while wiping down the counter on Friday morning. That guy with the twin girls who came in Thursday. Do you know him? Jimmy had stopped mid-chop, his knife suspended over an onion, and given her a long, measured look. You don't want to know about him, Lisa. Why not? Because knowing is dangerous. Jimmy returned to his cutting board, the knife moving in sharp, decisive strokes. Marco Bellini ain't somebody you want to get mixed up with. He's connected, if you know what I mean. Elisa had known exactly what he meant. Brooklyn wasn't just brownstones and artisanal coffee shops. It was also old neighborhoods where certain families still held power, where businesses paid for protection, where questions weren't asked and answers weren't offered. He seemed like a good father, she'd said quietly. Maybe he is. Doesn't change what he does for a living. Jimmy had scraped the onions into a pan, the sizzle punctuating his words. Stay away from Marco Bellini, Lisa, for your own good. But on Sunday afternoon, when the bell above the door chimed and Elisa looked up from pouring coffee for Mrs. Chen at table 4, there he was again. Marco Bellini, dressed more casually this time, dark jeans, a black leather jacket over a gray sweater, but still carrying that same aura of controlled power, and behind him, holding his hands, were Sophia and Gabriella. The girls looked different today, calmer. Their movements were still careful, deliberate, but there was less tension in their small bodies. Sophia wore noise-canceling headphones, blue ones with cartoon characters, pushed up on her head like a headband. Gabriella carried a small fidget toy, turning it over and over in her hands. Marco's eyes scanned the diner until they found Elisa. Something in his expression softened. Relief, maybe, or recognition, and he guided his daughters toward the same corner booth they'd occupied before. Elisa's heart did something complicated in her chest. She finished pouring Mrs. Chen's coffee, her hands suddenly unsteady, and approached their table. "Welcome back," she said, and was annoyed to hear her voice come out slightly breathless. "Hello?" Marco's voice was quieter than she remembered, less edged with desperation. "I hoped you'd be working today." "I'm always working," Elisa replied with a small smile. 6 days a week. That's too much. That's survival." The girls had already pulled out crayons, their own this time, a full box of 64 colors, and were beginning to draw on the clean placemats Elisa hadn't even given them yet. She noticed they each drew the same thing, repetitive circles, overlapping and precise, creating complex mandala-like patterns. "They wanted to come back," Marco said, watching his daughters with an expression Elisa was beginning to recognize. Love mixed with helplessness, pride mixed with fear. "They haven't stopped drawing since Thursday. And Sophia," he paused, something like wonder crossing his face. "Sophia asked for you. She said your name. She hasn't spoken in 3 months." Elisa felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "She said my name?" She read it. "Off your name tag, I guess." But yes, Elisa, clear as day, first word in 3 months. The weight of that settled between them. Elisa pulled out her order pad to give herself something to do with her hands. "What can I get you?" "Whatever you think they'd like, and coffee, black." Elisa nodded and retreated to the counter, her mind spinning. She prepared 2 chocolate milkshakes, remembering how the girls had responded to them before, and added a plate of plain buttered toast cut into precise squares. Simple, predictable, safe. She poured Marco's coffee and brought everything to the table. As she set down the plates, Gabriella looked up, her eyes, dark like her father's, fixed on Elisa's face with an intensity that was almost disconcerting. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached out and touched Elisa's hand. Just a touch, fingers against fingers. But Marco inhaled sharply. "She doesn't do that," he said quietly. "She doesn't initiate touch. Ever." Elisa stayed very still, letting Gabriella control the interaction. The little girl's fingers traced the lines of Elisa's palm, then withdrew. Gabriella returned to her drawing as if nothing had happened, but something had shifted in the air. "May I sit?" Elisa asked Marco. "Just for a minute, if that's okay with your boss. Rosie loves you, she won't mind." Elisa slid into the booth across from Marco, careful to leave plenty of space between herself and the girls. "How have they been since Thursday?" Marco's jaw tightened. Better, worse, I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its careful styling. I took them to their therapist Friday, Dr. Morrison. She's worked with them since my wife died. 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Elisa said softly. Cancer. Ovarian. 8 months from diagnosis to... He stopped, swallowed hard. Maria knew how to reach them. She understood them in a way I never have. When she died, they regressed. Lost words they'd had. Started having meltdowns constantly. I've tried everything. Therapists, specialists, medications. Nothing works like what you did in 5 minutes. It wasn't magic, Elisa said. Just understanding. My brother Miguel, he's 12 now. Nonverbal, like I said. My mom and I have learned what helps and what doesn't. Mostly through trial and error. Tell me. Marco leaned forward and Elisa caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Cigarette smoke, maybe, though she hadn't seen him smoking. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. You're not doing anything wrong, Elisa insisted. But, okay, can I ask you some questions? Anything. What's their home environment like? Sensory-wise? Marco frowned. What do you mean? Lights, sounds, textures? Are there a lot of bright lights? Loud appliances, rough fabrics, strong smells? I don't know. It's just a home. An apartment. Nice furniture. Good lighting. He trailed off, seeing something in Elisa's expression. That's bad? Not bad. Just potentially overwhelming. Autistic brains process sensory information differently. What seems normal to you might feel like assault to them. Fluorescent lights can feel like strobe lights. Normal conversation volume can feel like shouting. Certain fabrics can feel like sandpaper. Marco was staring at her like she was speaking revelation. I never thought about any of that. Most people don't, Elisa said gently. Why would you if your brain processes things typically? But for Sophia and Gabriella, the world is just more of everything. They're not being difficult. They're trying to survive an environment that's constantly hurting them. Christo, Marco breathed. I've been making everything worse. No, Elisa said firmly. You've been doing your best without information. That's different. Now you have information. Now you can adjust. Sophia looked up from her drawing and pulled her headphones down over her ears. The gesture was clear. The diner was getting louder as the early dinner crowd began to arrive. She self-regulates, Elisa observed. That's actually really advanced. She knows what she needs and takes care of it herself. The headphones were Dr. Morrison's idea. They help sometimes. What about at home? Do they have a quiet space? Somewhere they can go when things get overwhelming? Marco shook his head slowly. They have their bedroom, but it's decorated, like a regular kid's room. Pink walls, stuffed animals, toys everywhere. That might be too much stimulation, Elisa said. They might need something simpler, softer colors, less clutter, a weighted blanket for pressure, maybe a small tent or enclosed space where they can retreat. Marco pulled out his phone and began typing notes. What else? For the next 20 minutes, Elisa talked. She talked about routine and predictability, about visual schedules and social stories. She talked about the importance of pressure and movement, about fidget toys and stimming as regulation tools rather than behaviors to extinguish. She talked about communication, how nonverbal didn't mean non-communicative, how the girls were constantly expressing themselves if someone knew how to listen. Marco absorbed every word like a man dying of thirst. He asked questions, took notes, occasionally glanced at his daughters as if seeing them for the first time. You should be their therapist, he said finally. You know more in 20 minutes than anyone I've paid thousands of dollars. Elisa laughed. I'm not a therapist, I'm just a sister who loves her brother. You're more than that. Marco's eyes held hers, and something electric passed between them. You're exactly what they need. The moment stretched, becoming uncomfortable in its intensity. Elisa looked away first, her cheeks warming. I should get back to work, she said, starting to slide out of the booth. Wait. Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Plain white, expensive stock with just a name and phone number. No company, no title. If you're ever willing, if you'd consider helping us, helping them, I'll pay whatever you want. Elisa took the card, feeling its weight. I don't want money. Everyone wants money. We covered this last time, Elisa said with a slight smile. I'm not everyone. No, Marco agreed quietly. You're not. Elisa pocketed the card and stood. I'll think about it. She returned to work, but her awareness never left table 12. She watched as Marco helped his daughters eat their toast. as Sophia carefully dipped each square into her milkshake before consuming it, as Gabriella lined up her crayons by color before selecting each one. She watched as Marco's phone buzzed repeatedly and he ignored it, keeping his attention on his children. She watched as he paid, leaving another absurdly large tip that she'd have to fight him about, and prepared to leave. At the door, Sophia turned back. She was humming again, but this time it sounded almost like music rather than self-soothing. Her eyes found Elisa behind the counter. "Bye, Elisa," she said clearly, her voice high and sweet. The diner went quiet. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause. Marco's face transformed. Pure joy, followed immediately by tears he didn't bother to hide. He looked at Elisa across the diner, and the gratitude in his eyes was so intense it hurt to witness. "Bye, Sophia," Elisa called back, her own voice thick. "See you soon." After they left, Elisa found herself standing motionless behind the counter, Marco's business card burning a hole in her pocket, her heart beating too fast, her mind racing with possibilities and warnings. Jimmy emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "You're getting involved, aren't you?" "I don't know," Elisa said honestly. "His world ain't safe, Lisa. Men like him, there's always danger. Always someone looking to hurt them through the people they care about." "I know, but you're gonna help anyway." It wasn't a question. Elisa met Jimmy's eyes. He'd known her for 3 years, had become something like an uncle, protective and concerned. "They're just kids, Jimmy. They need help. How can I say no to that?" Jimmy sighed, shaking his head. "You got too big a heart, girl. Always have. Just be careful. Marco Bellini ain't a man to take lightly, and neither are his enemies." That night, lying in her small studio apartment in Bed-Stuy, listening to sirens wail outside and her neighbor's television through the thin walls, Elisa pulled out Marco's card. She turned it over in her hands, studying the embossed lettering, the single phone number. She thought about Sophia's voice saying her name, about Gabriella's tentative touch, about Marco's desperation and hope warring in his dark eyes. She thought about Miguel, about all the times strangers had stared at him, judged him, dismissed him as less than because his brain worked differently. About all the times she'd wished someone would see past his behaviors to the beautiful soul underneath. These girls deserved that. Deserved someone who saw them, really saw them, and didn't flinch away. At 11:47 p.m., Elisa picked up her phone and typed out a text message to the number on the card. "This is Elisa from the diner. I'd like to help if the offer still stands, but we need to talk about expectations and boundaries first. Coffee sometime?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came within 30 seconds. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Address below." "Thank you, Elisa. You have no idea what this means." An address in Brooklyn Heights followed. Elisa looked it up on her phone. A luxury high-rise overlooking the East River. Marco Bellini's world, laid out in marble and glass and views that cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. She set her phone aside and stared at the ceiling, where a water stain from last winter's leak formed a shape that looked almost like wings. What was she doing? Getting involved with a man like Marco Bellini, a man Jimmy had warned her about, a man whose very presence suggested danger and complication, was stupid, reckless, potentially disastrous. But those little girls. Lisa closed her eyes and saw Sophia's face when she'd spoken, saw Gabriella's hand reaching out for connection, saw Marco's tears of joy at hearing his daughter's voice. Some things were worth the risk. Outside, the first snow of November began to fall again, covering the city's grime in temporary purity, making Brooklyn look like something from a dream. Elisa fell asleep with Marco's business card on her nightstand, close enough to grab, close enough to tear up, close enough to change her life completely if she let it. She'd already decided which one she'd do. In Brooklyn Heights, Marco Bellini stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the same snow fall over the glittering city. His daughters slept in the next room, actually slept, peacefully, for the first time in days. On the glass-top table behind him, his phone displayed Elisa's message. He read it again, and again. A good man would leave her alone, would protect her from his world, from the violence and corruption that clung to him like a second skin. A good man would find someone else, someone already damaged, someone who understood the cost of proximity to power. But Marco Bellini had never claimed to be a good man, and his daughters needed her. He needed her. That was enough to quiet any remaining conscience. He texted his most trusted lieutenant, Vincent, who'd been with him since they were teenagers running numbers in Bensonhurst. Run a background check. Elisa Martinez. Works at Rosie's Diner on Prospect. I want to know everything. Not because he distrusted her, but because knowing meant protecting, and he would protect Elisa Martinez from everything his world might throw at her, even if she didn't know she needed protecting yet. Even if she never forgave him for it. The snow continued to fall, covering Brooklyn in white, creating the illusion that anything could be clean, anything could be new, anything could be different than what it was. But Marco knew better. Nothing in his world ever stayed clean for long. The lobby of Marco Bellini's building was all polished marble and understated wealth, the kind of luxury that didn't need to announce itself because everyone who walked through the doors already knew what it cost to live there. A doorman in a crisp uniform nodded to Elisa as she entered, his expression professionally neutral despite her obvious displacement in her worn jeans and thrifted peacoat. "I'm here to see Marco Bellini," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "He's expecting me." "Ms. Martinez?" the doorman asked, and when she nodded, he gestured toward the elevators. "Penthouse. The code is 4729. Of course it was the penthouse. Where else would a man like Marco Bellini live? The elevator was mirrored on all sides, forcing Elisa to confront her reflection as she ascended. She'd dressed carefully this morning. Not too casual, not trying too hard. Dark jeans, a simple cream sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Minimal makeup. She looked exactly like what she was. A working-class girl from the Bronx who'd somehow stumbled into a world she had no business being in. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, and Elisa stepped out into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire living area, offering panoramic views of the East River, the Brooklyn Bridge, and Manhattan beyond. The interior was sleek and modern. All clean lines, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and black, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than her annual salary. Everything was pristine, perfect, utterly devoid of the warmth that made a house a home. Marco appeared from around a corner, dressed in black slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Casual for him, Elisa supposed, though the watch on his wrist probably cost more than her car, if she'd owned a car. "Elisa," his voice was warm, relieved. "Thank you for coming. Your building is impressive," she managed, still taking it all in. "It's an apartment," Marco said with a slight shrug as if luxury penthouses were mundane. "Coffee? I have an espresso machine." "Of course you do," Elisa murmured, then caught herself. "Sorry, that came out wrong. Coffee would be great." Marco's lips quirked, almost a smile, as he led her to the kitchen. It was all stainless steel and marble countertops, professional-grade appliances that looked barely used. He moved through it with surprising competence, preparing espresso with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "Where are Sophia and Gabriella?" Elisa asked. "At therapy. Dr. Morrison takes them Monday mornings. My mother picks them up. She lives in the building, 2 floors down. They'll be back in about an hour." He handed her a tiny cup of espresso, rich and aromatic, and gestured toward the living area. They settled on a gray leather sofa that was probably Italian and definitely more comfortable than anything Elisa had ever sat on. "So," Marco said, his dark eyes intent on her face, "tell me what you need. What boundaries you mentioned in your text." Elisa took a sip of espresso, using the moment to organize her thoughts. She'd lain awake most of the night thinking about this conversation, about what she could and couldn't accept. "First, I need you to be honest with me," she began, "about who you are, what you do. I've lived in Brooklyn my whole life, Mr. Bellini. I'm not naive. I know what connected means." Marco's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his eyes. "Call me Marco. Marco, then. I need to know what I'm walking into. Because if I'm going to help your daughters, I need to understand the risks." For a long moment, Marco said nothing. He set down his espresso cup with careful precision, his jaw working as he considered his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "My family has been in Brooklyn for 4 generations. My great-grandfather came from Sicily in 1923 and did what immigrants did. He survived, built a business, built a network, built power. That legacy passed to my grandfather, then my father, then to me." He paused, his gaze distant. "Some of what we do is legitimate. Real estate, restaurants, import-export. Some of it exists in gray areas. Protection, mediation, services that people need but can't get through official channels. And the not gray areas?" Elisa pressed. Marco's eyes met hers, unflinching. I don't deal drugs. I don't traffic people. I don't hurt women or children. But yes, Elisa, I've done things that would horrify you. I've hurt people who needed hurting. I've made decisions that kept my family safe but weren't exactly legal. I won't lie and tell you I'm a good man. The honesty was brutal, and Elisa appreciated it even as her stomach knotted with anxiety. Are your daughters in danger because of what you do? I have enemies, Marco admitted. Men who would love to hurt me through them. But I have extensive security. My building is monitored 24/7. My mother never takes them anywhere without a driver who's also a bodyguard. At school there are protocols. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. I would die before I let anything happen to them, and I would kill anyone who tried. The casual way he said it, kill, sent a shiver down Elisa's spine. This wasn't posturing or movie tough guy talk. This was simple fact, delivered with absolute conviction. If I help them, Elisa said carefully, I'm just here for the girls. I'm not getting involved in the rest of it, whatever that is. Agreed. I won't lie to police or anyone else if something happens. Fair enough. And I need you to understand that I'm not doing this for money. If you try to pay me like I'm staff, this ends. Marco frowned. You should be compensated for your time. I have a job. I'll continue working at the diner. This, she gestured between them, toward the apartment. This is something I'm doing because those little girls need help and I can give it. The moment it becomes transactional, it becomes something else. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Marco said. But there was something like respect in his voice. No, I'm making it clear. I'm not for sale, Marco, not my time, not my knowledge, not my compassion. I'm choosing to help. There's a difference. Fine. He stood abruptly, moving to the windows, his shoulders tense. But you'll let me buy supplies, equipment, whatever the girls need. That's non-negotiable. That's for them. That's different. And you'll accept protection. Elisa blinked. What? Marco turned, his face serious. If you're going to be in my daughters' lives, you're going to be visible in my world. That makes you vulnerable. I'll have someone keep an eye on you. Discreetly. You won't even know they're there. That's non-negotiable, Marco repeated, his voice hard. You want to help my daughters? That's the price. I don't compromise on safety. Elisa wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. This wasn't about control. It was about the bone-deep fear of a man who'd already lost one person he loved and refused to lose anyone else. Okay, she said quietly, but discreetly. I mean it. I don't want some obvious bodyguard following me around. You won't even notice. The sound of the elevator arriving broke the tension. Voices, a woman's, older and melodic, speaking rapid Italian, echoed through the apartment. Then the twins appeared, followed by a woman in her early 60s with silver hair styled elegantly, wearing a cream suit that screamed old money. Marco, Tesoro. The girls were wonderful today, Dr. Morrison says. She stopped mid-sentence, noticing Elisa. Oh, we have a guest. The girls had frozen at the sight of Elisa, but not with fear or anxiety. Sophia's face lit up and she pulled off her headphones immediately. Gabriella's hands began their flapping motion, but it seemed excited rather than distressed. Elisa, Sophia said clearly, and Elisa's heart swelled at hearing her name again. Hi, Sophia. Hi, Gabriella. Marco's mother was staring between them, her expression a mixture of surprise and something sharper. Assessment. You're the girl from the diner. Marco told me about you. Mama, this is Elisa Martinez. Elisa, my mother, Carmela Bellini. Carmela approached with the bearing of a woman accustomed to authority, but her eyes were kind as they studied Elisa. You made my granddaughters speak. That's no small miracle. They just needed someone who understood them, Elisa said, feeling suddenly self-conscious under the older woman's scrutiny. Marco says you want to help them, to teach him how to reach them. If he'll listen, Elisa replied, then worried that sounded disrespectful. I mean, I'll listen, Marco interjected. To everything. Show me. The twins had moved closer to Elisa, maintaining a careful distance but clearly drawn to her presence. Sophia was humming softly, that same single note, but it sounded content now. Gabriella clutched her fidget toy, turning it over and over. Can I see their room? Elisa asked. That's where we should start. Marco led her down a hallway lined with more expensive art, Carmela and the twins following. He opened a door at the end and Elisa stepped into what could only be described as sensory hell. The room was large and lavishly decorated. Bright pink walls, a princess-themed canopy bed, Actually, two of them, side by side. Shelves overflowing with toys, stuffed animals, dolls, a TV mounted on the wall, overhead lights that were far too bright, busy, patterned curtains. Everything was expensive, carefully chosen, completely wrong. This is... Elisa searched for diplomatic words and failed. This has to change. All of it. Marco's face fell. Maria decorated it. Before she got sick, she wanted them to have a princess room, like she'd dreamed of as a girl. The grief in his voice made Elisa's chest ache. I'm sure it was done with love. But Marco, this room is attacking their nervous systems every moment they're in it. The colors are too bright. There's too much visual clutter. The lights are fluorescent. It's overwhelming. Carmela moved into the room, looking around with new eyes. Is that why they won't sleep in here? Why we always find them in the hallway and Marco's room anywhere but here? Probably, Elisa confirmed. They can't regulate in this environment. It's too much stimulation. What do they need? Marco asked, and Elisa could hear the struggle in his voice. The war between honoring his late wife's memory and doing what was best for his daughters. Calm colors, neutrals, soft lighting, lamps, not overhead, minimal furniture and toys. Organized systems so everything has a place. Blackout curtains, a weighted blanket for each of them, maybe a small tent or enclosed space where they can retreat when overwhelmed. She walked through the room cataloging everything. Soft textures, nothing scratchy or rough. A visual schedule on the wall showing their daily routine, and absolutely no TV in here. Bedrooms should be for sleep and calm, not stimulation. That's everything, Marco said, looking around at the room his wife had lovingly created. You're asking me to erase Maria's memory. Elisa turned to him, her voice gentle but firm. I'm asking you to help your daughters. Maria loved them. If she were here, if she understood what they needed, she'd change this room herself. You know that. Tears shone in Marco's eyes. Carmela moved to her son, placing a hand on his arm. She's right, Tesoro, the older woman said softly. Maria would want the girls to be comfortable, to be happy. This isn't about forgetting her, it's about helping them. Marco nodded slowly, swiping at his eyes. Fine, whatever they need. We'll redo the entire room. Can I make some sketches? Elisa asked. Show you what I'm thinking? Whatever you need. Over the next 2 hours, Elisa sat at Marco's dining table with the twins beside her, drawing plans for their new room. Sophia and Gabriella seemed fascinated by the process, occasionally pointing at colors or adding their own circles to Elisa's sketches. Marco watched from nearby, asking questions, taking notes on his phone, gradually understanding the principles Elisa explained. Carmela made lunch, pasta al pomodoro, simple and perfect, and they ate together at the table. The twins were more relaxed than Elisa had yet seen them, Sophia even attempting a few more words, Gabriella humming along with her sister. It felt almost normal, almost like a family. Then Marco's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by cold authority. I need to take this. Excuse me. He stepped into another room, his voice carrying back in low, terse Italian. Elisa couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. This was Marco Bellini, the businessman, the power broker, the man people feared. Carmela noticed her discomfort. You'll get used to it. The phone calls, the meetings, the men who come and go at strange hours. If you're going to be part of this family's life, you need to accept all of it. I'm just here for the girls, Elisa reminded her. Carmela's smile was knowing, almost sad. That's what I told myself once too, about Marco's father. I was just a girl from Bensonhurst who fell in love with a boy who promised me the world. I didn't want his other life. Didn't want to know about the business, the violence, the risks. But you can't separate the man from what he does, Kara. Eventually, you have to accept both, or walk away completely. I'm not... Elisa started, then stopped. Marco and I aren't... This isn't romantic, I'm helping his daughters. Of course, Carmela said, but her eyes said she saw something Elisa wasn't ready to admit. Just remember that when the complications come, because they always do. Marco returned 15 minutes later, his expression dark. I need to go out. Business that can't wait. We should probably go anyway, Elisa said, standing. I've taken up enough of your morning. No. Marco's hand caught hers, his grip warm and firm. Please stay. Finish the plans. My mother will be here. I'll be back in a few hours and we can talk about implementation. Marco, please. The word was quiet, almost vulnerable. They're calmer with you here. Stay. For them. How could she refuse that? Okay, a little longer. Marco's relief was visible. He grabbed a jacket, black leather again, and headed for the elevator. At the last moment, he turned back. Vincent will be downstairs. He'll drive you home when you're ready. I can take the subway. Vincent will drive you, Marco repeated, brooking no argument. Then he was gone, the elevator doors closing on his intense expression. Elisa turned to find Carmela watching her with that knowing look again. What? Elisa asked defensively. Nothing, Cara. Nothing at all. But as Elisa returned to her sketches, the twins leaning against her on either side, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped over an invisible line, that, just helping the girls, had somehow become something more complicated without her quite realizing it. Outside the windows, November clouds gathered over Brooklyn, promising snow. The city stretched out below them. Millions of lives, millions of stories, most of them simpler than this, cleaner than this. Elisa had never wanted complicated, had never sought out danger or moral ambiguity. She'd wanted to finish nursing school, help her brother, live a quiet life of service and meaning. But Sophia chose that moment to lean her head against Elisa's shoulder, a gesture of trust that made Elisa's breath catch. And Gabriella reached out to touch her hand again, those small fingers seeking connection. Some things, Elisa thought, were worth the complications, even if she couldn't yet see where those complications would lead. Marco sat in the back of his black SUV, Vincent driving, heading toward a warehouse in Red Hook where a problem needed solving. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from his lieutenants, updates on various operations, the endless management of an empire built on fear and loyalty. But his mind wasn't on business. It was on a girl with kind eyes and worn sweaters who'd walked into his pristine apartment and made it feel like a home for the first time since Maria died. A girl who looked at his daughters and saw people, not problems. Who'd pushed back against him without fear, who'd refused his money, who'd somehow slipped past every defense he'd built. Dangerous. She was dangerous in ways his enemies weren't, because she threatened something deeper than his power or his wealth. She threatened the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Boss? Vincent's voice pulled him back. We're here. Marco looked up at the warehouse, at the problem waiting inside. A man who'd stolen from him, who thought he could get away with it because Marco had seemed distracted lately. Time to remind Brooklyn why that was a mistake. He stepped out of the SUV, his face hardening into the mask everyone expected. Marco Bellini, the boss, the man without mercy. But as he walked into the warehouse, some part of him remained in that penthouse apartment, watching a Waitress sketch bedroom designs with his daughters leaning against her, and wondering how long he could keep those two worlds separate, wondering if he even wanted to anymore. December arrived with biting cold and an early snowstorm that blanketed Brooklyn in 8 inches of white. The city transformed overnight. Sharp edges softened, noise muffled, everything temporarily beautiful, before the plows came through and turned it all to gray slush. Elisa had been working with the twins for 3 weeks now, and the transformation was remarkable. Their bedroom had been completely redesigned. The princess beds were gone, replaced by 2 simple platform beds with cream-colored linens and weighted blankets in soft blue. The walls had been repainted a calming sage green. Soft lamps provided warm lighting instead of harsh overhead fluorescence. A visual schedule hung on one wall, pictures showing morning routine, school time, therapy, meals, bedtime. In one corner stood a small pop-up tent filled with pillows, where either girl could retreat when overwhelmed. The shelves held fewer toys, but each one was carefully chosen and had its designated place. A label maker had become Elisa's best friend. Everything was organized, predictable, manageable. But more than the physical space, the girls themselves had changed. Sophia was speaking in short sentences now, her vocabulary expanding daily. Gabriella, still nonverbal, had learned to use a picture communication board that Elisa had created, pointing to images to express her needs and feelings. The meltdowns had decreased dramatically. The twins smiled more. They'd even started sleeping through the night in their own beds. Marco watched these changes with something approaching awe. He'd started coming home earlier, canceling meetings that could be rescheduled, spending more time with his daughters. Elisa had taught him how to read their cues, how to provide the deep pressure they craved, how to anticipate sensory overload before it became a crisis. They'd fallen into a routine. Elisa would arrive at the penthouse after her morning shift at the diner around 2 p.m. and stay until 7 or 8. She'd work with the girls on communication, on social skills, on navigating the world that seemed designed for everyone but them. Marco would join them when he could, learning alongside his daughters. And somewhere in those weeks, something had shifted between Elisa and Marco. It was in the way his eyes lingered on her face when she laughed at something Sophia said, in the way her breath caught when his hand brushed hers reaching for the same crayon, in the quiet moments after the girls went to bed, when they'd sit with coffee and talk about everything and nothing, her nursing school dreams, his complicated relationship with his father's legacy, the strange intimacy of shared silence. Carmela noticed, of course. She'd raise her eyebrows when she found them sitting too close on the couch, their body language unconsciously mirroring each other. But she said nothing, just watched with that knowing expression that made Elisa's cheeks burn. Vincent noticed too. Marco's most trusted lieutenant had become a fixture in Elisa's life, the driver who appeared whenever she needed to get home, the silent presence who made sure she got to and from the penthouse safely. He was a large man, mid-40s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He never spoke much, but Elisa had learned to read the approval in his slight nods, the way he'd started bringing her coffee exactly how she liked it. "Boss is different," Vincent had said to her once, waiting in the car while she ran into a store for supplies. "Lighter. Haven't seen him like this since before Mrs. Bellini passed." Elisa hadn't known what to say to that. Now, on a Tuesday evening in mid-December, with Christmas lights twinkling across the Brooklyn Bridge visible through the penthouse windows, everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. Elisa was helping Sophia practice writing her name. The fine motor control was challenging, but the girl was determined. When the elevator doors opened and 3 men stepped out, they weren't like Vincent, who moved with protective awareness but maintained a respectful distance. These men radiated danger. They wore expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the bulk of weapons underneath. Their eyes were hard, calculating, sweeping the apartment with professional assessment. Marco appeared from his office, his expression carefully neutral. "Gentlemen, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Plans changed," the tallest one said. He was maybe 50 with silver hair slicked back and a face that had seen violence up close. "Tony wants to move up the timeline. We need to talk. Now." His eyes landed on Elisa, and something cold slithered down her spine. This man looked at her the way a predator looked at prey, assessing value, calculating weakness. "Marco," she said quietly, standing. "Should I take the girls to their room?" "Yes," Marco said, his voice tight. "Elisa, please." She gathered the twins. Both had gone rigid at the appearance of the strangers, Sophia's humming starting up in distress, and guided them quickly down the hallway. In their bedroom, she closed the door and put on soft music, trying to create a buffer against whatever was happening in the living room. But the apartment's acoustics were excellent, and voices carried. "Risk you're taking, Bellini. Bringing an outsider into your home. She's not part of the business. She works with my daughters. She sees who comes and goes. She hears things. That makes her a liability. She's not a liability. She's off limits. Make that clear to Tony. You don't give orders anymore, Marco. You made your choice, stepping back from operations. That means you don't get to decide who's off limits." The sound of something slamming, a hand on a table maybe, made Gabriella whimper. Elisa pulled both girls closer, her heart racing. "My daughters are off limits. Anyone in their lives is off limits. That's not negotiable. Everything's negotiable. You want to play family man, that's fine. But don't forget what you are, what you'll always be. The minute you brought that girl into this world, you put a target on her back." Silence. Then Marco's voice, low and deadly. "Get out. Marco, get out. Tell Tony if he has concerns he can bring them to me directly, not send his dogs to threaten people under my protection. You're making a mistake. It won't be my first, but it will be your last if you don't leave. Now." The sound of footsteps, the elevator doors opening and closing, then silence. Elisa waited several minutes before emerging, leaving the twins occupied with their favorite activity, drawing mandalas with markers. She found Marco standing at the windows, his back rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Marco?" He didn't turn. "You should go home. Vincent will drive you." "What just happened?" "Nothing you need to worry about. They were talking about me being a liability." Elisa moved closer, anger overriding fear. "Don't lie to me. You promised honesty." Marco spun to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her step back. Fear, fury, and something else. Something that looked like anguish. "I'm trying to protect you," he said roughly. "From all of this. From them. From me. By shutting me out. By keeping you safe." His voice rose, then dropped as he visibly fought for control. Christo, Elisa, don't you understand? Every day you're here. Every day you're connected to me. You're in danger. Real danger. These aren't good people. They don't have lines they won't cross. Then maybe I should stop coming, Elisa said, though the words hurt to say. If I'm putting the girls at risk. No. Marco closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. No, you can't leave. They need you. I need. He stopped, his jaw clenching. We'll figure it out. I'll increase security. Vincent will have backup. You'll never be unprotected. I don't want to live like that, Elisa whispered, looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone's following me, being afraid all the time. I know. Dio, I know. I never should have pulled you into this. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, the gesture achingly tender. But I'm a selfish bastard, Elisa, because even knowing the risks, I can't let you go. The air between them electrified. They were so close, closer than they'd ever been. Elisa could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. This is a bad idea, she breathed. The worst, Marco agreed. You're dangerous. Your world is dangerous. I know. I should walk away right now. You should. Neither of them moved. Then Marco's phone rang, shattering the moment. He stepped back, dragging a hand through his hair as he answered. What? His expression changed as he listened, going from frustrated to alert to coldly furious in seconds. When? How many? A pause. No, don't engage. Pull back and wait for me. 20 minutes. He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Vincent, get up here now. What's wrong? Elisa asked, fear spiking. There's a situation. Nothing to do with you, but I need to handle it. Vincent will take you home. Marco was already moving, grabbing a jacket from the closet, checking something in a drawer. A gun, Elisa realized with a jolt. He had a gun, and he was checking it like it was routine. Marco, not now, Elisa, please. He called down the hallway. Mama, I need you to stay with the girls. Carmela emerged from her own apartment. She'd been there the whole time, Elisa realized, during the confrontation with those men. How much had she heard? Be careful, Tesoro, Carmela said, her face tight with worry. Always am. Marco turned to Elisa. Vincent will make sure you get home safely. Don't go anywhere alone tonight. Tomorrow either. I'll call. Then he was in the elevator, the doors closing on his grim expression, and Elisa was left standing in the penthouse with Carmela and the distant sound of the twins playing in their room, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under her. Vincent appeared from his post outside. Ready, Ms. Martinez? What's happening? Elisa asked. Where is he going? Boss's business, not your concern. But Vincent's face was tight, worried in a way she'd never seen. The drive to her apartment in Bed-Stuy was silent. Vincent kept checking his mirrors, his phone buzzing constantly with messages he'd glance at and ignore. He walked her to her building's door, swept the lobby with his eyes, then waited until she was inside before leaving. Elisa climbed the stairs to her third-floor studio, her mind racing. She shouldn't care this much. Shouldn't be this worried about a man she barely knew, whose world was violence and crime and things she didn't want to understand. But she did care, terrifyingly much. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, shabbier. The contrast between Marco's penthouse and her reality was never starker than when she came home. Single room with a kitchenette, bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, radiator that clanked and hissed, sounds of her neighbors' lives bleeding through thin walls. This was her world. Real, unglamorous, safe. Marco's world was dangerous, beautiful and terrible and completely incompatible with hers. She should stop going to the penthouse. Should text Marco right now and tell him she couldn't do this anymore. The girls were doing better. They could find another therapist, someone qualified, someone who didn't complicate everything just by existing. Elisa pulled out her phone, typed the message, read it, deleted it, tried again, deleted again. She couldn't do it. Not just because the twins needed her, though they did, but because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, Marco Bellini had become important to her. His rare smiles, his fierce love for his daughters, his quiet moments of vulnerability when he'd talk about Maria and his grief and his fear of failing again. The good man hidden inside all that danger and power. Elisa fell asleep on her couch, phone clutched in her hand, waiting for a call that didn't come. Marco didn't call that night, or the next morning. By noon, Elisa was frantic. She'd tried his number a dozen times, straight to voicemail. She'd texted, no response. Even Vincent wasn't answering. She was scheduled to work the evening shift at the diner, but she couldn't focus. She burned herself on the coffee maker, got orders wrong, snapped at Jimmy when he asked if she was okay. "Something's wrong," she told him during a brief lull. "Marco, the guy with the twins, he's not answering. Something happened last night and now he's just gone." Jimmy's expression was grim. "I warned you, Lisa. Men like that, they disappear sometimes. Into hospitals. Into jail. Into the ground. Don't say that." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, but you need to hear it. This is what their world looks like. Violence, danger, uncertainty. You sure you want to sign up for that?" Elisa didn't have an answer. At 7 p.m., the diner door opened, and Vincent walked in. He looked exhausted. Tie loosened, suit rumpled, a healing cut above his left eye. Elisa rushed over. "Is he okay? Where is he?" "He's fine. Handled the situation, but there were complications." Vincent glanced around the diner. Several customers were watching with interest. "Can you take a break? Rosie?" Elisa called to her boss. "Go. 10 minutes." Outside, in the cold December night, Vincent leaned against the SUV and lit a cigarette. "Boss wanted me to tell you he's sorry. For disappearing. For worrying you. What happened? Can't give you details, but it was bad. Blood bad. Boss took a hit. Nothing serious, just a graze. But he didn't want you seeing him like that. Didn't want to scare you more than he already has." Elisa's knees went weak. "He was shot? Grazed. Like I said, nothing serious. He's had worse." Vincent took a long drag. "He wants to know if you'll still come tomorrow. Work with the girls. He'll understand if you say no. He'll pay you for the work you've done, get you a reference for whatever." "Yes." Vincent blinked. "Yes? Yes, I'll come tomorrow. Tell him." Elisa paused, not sure what she wanted to say. "Tell him I'll be there. For the girls." Vincent studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Ms. Martinez." "Probably both," Elisa admitted. She went back inside, finished her shift in a daze, and took the subway home with Vincent following in his SUV. Protection she no longer protested. In her apartment, she stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Same face, same life, but everything had changed. In 3 weeks, she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Had let herself care about people she should have kept at a distance. A man who carried a gun like it was normal, who disappeared into violence and came back bleeding, who lived in a world where threats came in the form of men in expensive suits and problems were solved with methods she didn't want to imagine. She should run, should protect herself while she still could, but tomorrow she'd go back to that penthouse, would help those little girls who trusted her, would see Marco Bellini and whatever wounds he carried, physical and otherwise, because sometimes even when you knew better, your heart made choices your brain couldn't rationalize, and Elisa's heart had made its choice. Christmas Eve arrived with crystalline cold and a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Brooklyn glittered under fresh snow, the city dressed in its most deceptive beauty, lights strung across brownstones, wreaths on doors, the illusion that everything was peaceful and good. Elisa stood outside Marco's building, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air, carrying a bag of wrapped presents for the twins. Simple things, sensory toys, weighted stuffed animals, a communication board she'd hand-painted with care. She'd spent her last paycheck on them, ignoring her mother's worried texts about rent money. The doorman waved her through with a smile. She was a regular now, recognized, accepted into this rarefied world that still didn't quite feel real. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. 2 weeks had passed since that terrifying night when Marco had disappeared into violence. 2 weeks during which their relationship had shifted into something neither of them named, but both felt constantly. He'd been different when she returned the next day. Quieter, more careful with her, like she was made of glass. There was a bandage on his left shoulder that he tried to hide, moving stiffly when he thought she wasn't watching. The shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and burdens he wouldn't share. But with the twins he was transformed, patient, present, learning their language with dedication that broke Elisa's heart. He'd sit on the floor and build block towers that Sophia would knock down, laughing. He'd apply deep pressure to Gabriella's shoulders when she got overwhelmed, using the techniques Elisa had taught him. He was becoming the father they needed, and Elisa was falling in love with him. It was a terrifying, inconvenient truth she'd admitted to herself 3 days ago, lying in bed at 2 a.m., unable to stop thinking about the way Marco had looked at her earlier, like she was simultaneously his salvation and his damnation. The elevator doors opened. The penthouse was transformed. A Christmas tree stood by the windows, real, filling the space with pine scent, decorated simply with white lights and handmade ornaments the twins had created. Garland wrapped the staircase railing. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm shadows. It looked like a home, like a family lived here. Marco emerged from the kitchen wearing dark jeans and a cream sweater, casual in a way that made him look younger, more approachable. His face lit up when he saw her. "Elisa, you came." "Of course I came, I told you I would." Something eased in his expression. Relief, maybe. He'd been afraid she'd change her mind, afraid that the reality of his world would finally drive her away. "Where are the girls?" "With my mother, baking cookies, or attempting to. There may be more flour on them than in the dough." His smile was soft, genuine. "They're excited you're here. Sophia's been asking for you all morning." Warmth bloomed in Elisa's chest. "I brought presents. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." Marco stepped closer, and the air shifted. They were alone. Carmela and the twins occupied in the kitchen. Vincent stationed discreetly outside. Just the two of them in the candlelit space, the city glittering beyond the windows like a promise. "Elisa," Marco said quietly, "we need to talk." Her heart stuttered. "That sounds ominous." "It's not." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Maybe it is. I don't know anymore." He led her to the couch, and they sat with careful space between them. Marco's hands were clasped tightly, his knuckles white with tension. "I've been meeting with people," he began. "Business associates, lawyers, financial advisors, making changes." "What kind of changes?" "I'm stepping back from the family operations. Not completely, that's not possible, and it wouldn't be safe. But I'm transitioning the more problematic aspects to my cousins, focusing on the legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, the import company." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "I can't be the man my father was. Not anymore. Not if I want to be the father my daughters need." Elisa's breath caught. "Marco, that's dangerous, complicated, going to piss off a lot of people," he finished. "I know, but that night when those men came here, when they threatened you," his jaw clenched, "I realized I couldn't keep living in two worlds. Couldn't keep pretending I could protect everyone I care about while staying in the life. Something had to change." "You're doing this because of what they said about me?" "I'm doing this because I want a different life. For Sophia and Gabriella. For..." He trailed off, but his eyes said what his words didn't. "For us. It's going to take time," Marco continued. "Maybe a year, maybe more. And there will be resistance. People who don't want to let me go, who see it as weakness or betrayal. It won't be safe. Not for a while." "Are you telling me this as a warning? Or as..." Elisa couldn't finish the question. Marco reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady despite the tremor she felt in his fingers. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know. To make an informed choice about whether..." He took a shaky breath. "Christo, I'm no good at this. Words, feelings. Maria used to say I had the emotional vocabulary of a brick wall." Elisa's lips quirked despite the tension. "You're doing okay? I care about you, Elisa. More than I should. More than is smart or safe. I look at you and see everything I thought I'd lost when Maria died. Hope, goodness, the possibility of something better than what I've built. You make me want to be the man my daughters believe I am. The man you see when you look at me." Tears pricked Elisa's eyes. "Marco, let me finish, please." He squeezed her hand. "I can't promise you easy. I can't promise you safe. My past is always going to be there. Always going to be a shadow over anything we build. There will be men who see you as a weakness to exploit. Moments when you'll be afraid, when you'll regret ever meeting me. But," Elisa whispered, "but I can promise you honest. I can promise you that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you. That I'll protect you with everything I have. That my daughters already love you and I..." He stopped, his voice breaking. "I'm falling in love with you, Elisa. Have been since the first moment you walked up to my table and saw my daughters as people instead of problems." The world tilted. Elisa's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of your world. Of what could happen. Of how much I already care about all of you. I know. You should be terrified. You should run." "I should," Elisa agreed. "Any rational person would. But..." She looked into his eyes, dark, hopeful, terrified in their own way, and made her choice. "But I'm not running. I'm staying. For Sophia and Gabriella. And for you. Marco's breath left him in a rush. Elisa, I have conditions, she interrupted. No more shutting me out when things get dangerous. No more disappearing and leaving me to wonder if you're alive or dead. You promise to keep transitioning out, to keep choosing this. She gestured at the decorated apartment, the evidence of family and normalcy. Over that, she didn't need to specify what that was. I promise, Marco said immediately. And you let me help. Really help. Not just with the girls, but with building whatever this life is going to look like. I'm not some delicate thing to be protected and kept separate. If I'm in, I'm all in. Partner, not bystander. Something like awe crossed Marco's face. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm probably insane, Elisa countered, but she was smiling through tears. But yes to whatever this is. Yes to trying. Yes to… Marco kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission, a question posed by lips and breath. Then Elisa's hands came up to frame his face, and the kiss deepened, became an answer, a promise, a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. We're going to make this work, he said fiercely, whatever it takes. Papa, Elisa, come see. Sophia's voice broke the moment. They pulled apart, laughing shakily, as the twins appeared around the corner. Both girls were covered in flour, chocolate smeared on their faces, their eyes bright with excitement. We made cookies, Sophia announced proudly. They're messy, Gabriella added via her communication board, pointing to the picture for disaster. Carmela appeared behind them, equally flour-covered, her expression knowing as she took in Elisa and Marco on the couch, their linked hands, the obvious fact that something had shifted between them. Dinner will be ready in an hour, she said simply. Elisa, you're staying, yes? It wasn't really a question. It was an acceptance, an invitation into the family. Yes, Elisa said. I'm staying. They ate dinner together around Marco's table, Carmela's homemade lasagna, garlic bread, salad, and the slightly burned cookies for dessert. The twins were animated, Sophia using more words than Elisa had ever heard from her, Gabriella communicating clearly with her board and occasional vocalizations. After dinner, they gathered around the Christmas tree. Marco distributed presents. Too many, too expensive, but chosen with care. Educational toys for the girls, a cashmere scarf for his mother, and for Elisa, a delicate silver bracelet with 3 charms, a book, a heart, and 2 small figures holding hands. The book is for your nursing dreams, Marco explained quietly as he fastened it around her wrist. The heart is self-explanatory, and these, he touched the 2 figures, are Sophia and Gabriella, so you always remember you changed their lives. Changed mine. Elisa couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. When the girls opened her presents and Sophia hugged her for the first time, actually initiated a hug, Elisa felt something settle in her chest. Rightness, maybe. The sense that all her choices had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Later, after the twins were asleep in their calm, organized bedroom, after Carmela had retired to her apartment with knowing smiles, Marco and Elisa stood at the windows overlooking Brooklyn. What happens now? Elisa asked, leaning into his side. Marco's arm came around her, solid and warm. Now we figure it out, day by day. I keep making changes. You keep helping the girls and me. We build something new. It won't be easy. No, Marco agreed. But the best things never are. Below them, Brooklyn sparkled with Christmas lights. Millions of people living their complicated lives, making their own impossible choices. Somewhere in those streets, dangers still lurked. Marco's past wouldn't disappear just because he wanted it to. There would be challenges ahead, threats to navigate, consequences to face. But right now, in this moment, with Marco's arms around her, and the twins sleeping peacefully down the hall, Elisa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Merry Christmas, Marco, she whispered. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Merry Christmas, amore mio. And as snow began to fall again over Brooklyn, covering the city in white, 2 broken people who'd found each other in the chaos stood together at the window, believing, against all odds and better judgment, that love might actually be enough, that sometimes even the darkest hearts could find light. That family wasn't about perfection or safety, but about showing up, staying present, and choosing each other every day despite the risks. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning. And for Marco Bellini and Elisa Martinez, that was more than enough.